The house always woke before the sun, not all at once, never loudly, but in small, almost polite movements. The refrigerator hummed itself awake like an old man clearing his throat. The pipes whispered behind the walls as water warmed somewhere deep and hidden. Outside, the street lamp flickered, unsure whether it still had a job to do. I rose before the alarm, as I usually did. Years of fatherhood had tuned my body to a different clock, one that had nothing to do with ambition or urgency. It was the clock of lunches that needed packing, socks that needed matching, small hearts that needed steadiness before the world began asking things of them. The floor was cold under my feet. I paused for a moment in the hallway, listening. 2 soft breaths behind one door. My son curled inward like he was still learning how much space he was allowed to take. One lighter, almost humming breath behind the other door. My daughter, dreaming with her mouth slightly open, her hair a quiet mess across the pillow. I stood there longer than necessary. It felt important to witness it, to remember that this, right here, was real, solid, worth waking for. The kitchen light clicked on with a muted snap. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove, the metal clinking softly as if it were trying not to wake anyone. Coffee grounds waited in their jar, dark and bitter smelling. I breathed them in before adding water, a small ritual that had nothing to do with caffeine and everything to do with grounding myself in the morning. Outside, rain had started sometime in the night, not the dramatic kind, just a steady, patient drizzle that softened the world and made everything feel farther away than it really was. I watched it slide down the window in thin, uneven lines. This was the hour I loved most. Before expectations, before explanations, before anyone needed me to be more than what I already was. I packed lunches slowly, apple slices arranged just so because my daughter liked them neat. A sandwich cut diagonally because my son insisted it tasted better that way. A note folded into each bag, nothing clever, just a reminder that I was thinking of them even when I wasn't there. I had learned long ago that children remembered presents more than gifts, tone more than words, the way you listened when they spoke, even when the story wandered and circled back on itself. The kettle whistled softly. I poured the water, stirred, and carried my mug to the small table by the window. That was when I noticed the quiet on the other side of the house. Not the good quiet, not the peaceful kind. The bedroom door remained closed. She used to wake early, too. We used to share these mornings, spoken or unspoken, it didn't matter. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. But there had been a shared gravity then, a sense that we were orbiting the same center. Lately, it felt like she had drifted into a different sky. I didn't resent it, not exactly. People change, lives stretch and pull in directions you can't always predict. But there was a particular kind of loneliness that came from sharing a roof with someone who had already left in quieter ways. She emerged just as the kids were stirring. Her footsteps were quick, purposeful, phone already in hand, eyes scanning something only she could see. "Morning," I said gently. She replied, not unkindly, but not warmly either. She poured herself coffee without sitting, leaned against the counter, scrolled, typed, paused, scrolled again. I watched her the way you watch weather, aware that it could change but unable to influence it. The kids came in next, blinking and yawning. My daughter padded straight toward me, arms reaching without words. I lifted her onto my hip, feeling her warmth, her weight, the simple certainty of it. My son grabbed his cereal and sat, already half lost in his own thoughts. Their mother kissed the tops of their heads, absently, distracted, her attention pulled elsewhere. Meetings, maybe. Messages. A life that seemed increasingly loud and bright just beyond the walls of this kitchen. I wondered, not for the first time, when exactly I had become background noise. It wasn't sudden. That was the thing. It happened in increments, in postponed conversations, in smiles that didn't reach the eyes, in plans made without checking whether I was free. I had stepped back willingly once, long ago, believing that love meant making space, that partnership meant sacrifice, even when it wasn't noticed. I still believed that. But belief didn't stop the quiet ache that settled in my chest most mornings now. We walked the kids to school together, though she left early after that. Her heels clicked sharply against the pavement, each step decisive. She didn't look back. I watched her go, then took the children's hands. The schoolyard buzzed with noise and color. Parents clustered in familiar groups. Some nodded politely, others barely acknowledged me. I felt their glances sometimes, curious, assessing. The father who stayed, the man who packed lunches, the one without the visible ladder. I didn't mind, not really. Or maybe I did, and I had simply learned to carry it quietly. After drop-off, I walked home alone. Rain had eased into a mist. The street smelled clean, washed of yesterday. At home, the silence returned. I cleaned, folded laundry, fixed the loose hinge on the cabinet door she had mentioned weeks ago. Small acts of maintenance, of care. Proof that I was still here, still contributing in ways that didn't show up on spreadsheets. By the time she returned that evening, the house was warm again, with dinner smells and children's voices. She ate quickly, answered messages, smiled at something on her screen. We spoke, but only about logistics. Who had practice when, what needed buying, whether the trash had been taken out. There was no fight, no accusation, just a widening gap where intimacy used to live. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with the same mug from the morning, now cold and untouched. The rain returned, tapping against the glass. I thought about the man I used to be, or rather the man people assumed I must miss being. The titles, the velocity, the sense of constant forward motion. But what I missed, what I truly missed, was simpler than that. I missed being seen, not admired, not envied, seen. She passed through the room without stopping. "I'm tired," she said. "I have an early meeting." "Of course," I replied. She hesitated just for a moment, as if there might be something else to say. Then she turned away. The door closed softly behind her. I remained where I was, listening to the house settle around me. Some storms announced themselves with thunder. Others arrived quietly, carried in on the back of silence. I didn't know yet what was coming. But somewhere deep, beneath the routines and the patience and the calm I had cultivated so carefully, something was shifting. Not anger, not fear, awareness. And once you notice the quiet changing, you can never unhear it. It happened on an ordinary night. That was the part that stayed with me the longest, that nothing about the evening warned me. No raised voices, no slammed doors, no sharp edges. Just a Tuesday that folded into itself the way Tuesdays always do, unremarkable and forgettable, until suddenly it wasn't. Dinner dishes were drying in the rack. The house smelled faintly of soap and warm bread. The children were asleep, the kind of deep sleep that only comes after a day filled with movement and certainty. I had tucked them in myself, lingering a little longer than usual, listening to their breathing settle into something slow and trusting. When I closed their doors, I did it gently, as if sound itself could bruise what remained of the evening. She was already sitting at the kitchen table when I came back down, not with her phone this time. That alone should have told me something. The overhead light was on, too bright for the hour. It flattened everything, stripped the room of shadows and softness. The kind of light you use when you want clarity, not comfort. She didn't look up right away. I poured myself a glass of water, took a sip, set it down carefully. "Everything okay?" I asked. She folded her hands together, fingers interlaced, knuckles pale. When she finally met my eyes, there was no anger there. That was what unsettled me most. "I've been thinking," she said. I nodded, said nothing. I had learned that silence often invited truth faster than reassurance ever could. "I don't think this is working anymore." The words landed quietly. No echo, no crash, just a statement, clean, final. I waited for the rest, some explanation, some visible emotion, something to give the sentence weight. But she simply exhaled and continued, as if reading from something already decided. "I'm not happy," she said, "and I haven't been for a long time." I sat down across from her. The chair scraped softly against the floor. I noticed how steady my hands were, how calm my breathing felt, as if my body had already accepted what my mind was still circling. "I see," I said. She blinked, almost disappointed by the lack of resistance. "I want a divorce." There it was, not screamed, not softened, delivered the way you announce a change in plans. I let the words sit between us, watched how they seemed to create space, pushing the air outward, rearranging the room. "Okay," I said after a moment. Her eyebrows lifted, just slightly. "That's it?" she asked. I considered the question, searched myself for the reaction she might be expecting. Anger, bargaining, disbelief. What I found instead was something quieter, a deep, familiar tiredness. Not physical, emotional. The fatigue of holding something fragile for too long, knowing it might break anyway. "What would you like me to say?" I asked gently. She leaned back in her chair, frustration flickering now, finally. "I don't know. Something. Anything. You're always so calm. It's like nothing reaches you." I almost smiled at that. Almost. "If you've already decided," I said, "then shouting won't change anything." She scoffed. "That's the problem. You never fight. You never want more." There it was, the accusation that had been hovering unspoken for years. "You're content with too little," she continued. "With mediocrity, with staying small." I absorbed the words, slowly, the way you take in cold water one step at a time. "I chose this life," I said. "With you, with the kids." She shook her head. "No, you settled for it. You gave up. You could have been more." I watched her as she spoke, noticing how animated she'd become now, how alive the critique made her. It wasn't cruelty, exactly. It was disappointment sharpened into resentment. "You have no ambition anymore," she said. "You're just here." I looked around the kitchen, the photos on the fridge, the height marks on the doorframe, the small, ordinary evidence of a life lived attentively. "Yes," I said quietly. "I am." Her mouth tightened. "That's not enough for me." I nodded. "I know." The rain had started again outside, heavier this time. It rattled against the windows, impatient. She stood and began pacing, words spilling faster now. "I don't want to wake up 10 years from now and realize I wasted my potential. I want more. More than this routine. More than you staying home and pretending that's fulfillment." The phrase stung, not because it was loud, but because it was careless. I thought of the mornings, the lunches, the small conversations that shaped who our children were becoming, the steady presence that asked for nothing in return. Pretending. I didn't correct her. "I'm not asking for anything from you," she said finally. "I just want out." "Of course," I replied. She stopped pacing, turned to face me fully now. "You're really just going to accept this?" she asked. "No fight, no argument, after everything?" I met her gaze. "Acceptance isn't indifference," I said. "It's respect for your choice." Her laugh was short and sharp. "You always say things like that, like you're above it all." "I'm not above it," I said. "I'm just not afraid of it." That was when her expression shifted. Not anger, not sadness, contempt. "Of course you're not," she said. "You don't have anything to lose." I let the words pass through me. "I'll take the house," she continued briskly. "The accounts, the investments. You can keep whatever personal things you want. I'll have my lawyer draw it up." I considered that too. The practicalities, the math of separation. "I don't need anything," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't be noble. This isn't a movie." "I'm not being noble," I replied. "I'm being honest." She studied me as if trying to find the trick, the angle. "You really have no idea how the world works anymore," she said. "You think you can just start over with nothing." I thought of a different time, a different version of myself, a life she had only ever known in fragments. "Yes," I said simply, "I do." She shook her head, disgusted now. "You're unbelievable." Maybe I was, but as she gathered her things and left the room, heels clicking sharply against the floor, I remained where I was, listening to the rain. The house felt different already, as if it had exhaled something it had been holding. I didn't feel relief, not yet. But I didn't feel panic either, just a quiet certainty settling in my chest. Some endings don't need to be fought. Some truths don't need to be defended. And some storms don't break things, they clear them. I turned off the overhead light, leaving the kitchen in shadow once more, and sat there a while longer, alone with the sound of rain and the knowledge that my life had just split into before and after. Not with a scream, but with a sentence spoken calmly under a light too bright to hide anything. The apartment smelled like dust and old paint when we first stepped inside. Not the dramatic kind of neglect, no mold, no broken windows, but the quiet residue of lives that had passed through and left nothing behind. The kind of place meant to be temporary, a holding room between decisions. I unlocked the door with a key that still felt unfamiliar in my hand. "Is this it?" my son asked, standing just inside the doorway with his backpack still on. "This is it for now," I said. The word now mattered. Children understood time differently. They needed anchors, not absolutes. The apartment was small, one narrow hallway, 2 bedrooms that felt more like suggestions than rooms, a living area that blended into the kitchen without ceremony. The heater hummed weakly, as if unsure whether it could really do the job it had been given. Outside, winter pressed itself against the windows. My daughter ran ahead, pushing open doors, narrating her discoveries out loud. "This one's mine," she said, choosing the room with the crooked closet door. My son nodded toward the other without complaint. I set my single suitcase down by the wall. It was strange how little I had brought. Clothes mostly, a few books, the framed photo of the 3 of us at the beach, salt in our hair, sunburned noses, a day that had felt infinite at the time. Everything else had stayed behind, or had been taken. That first night, we ate pizza from a box balanced on our knees. The floor was cold even through our socks. The furniture wouldn't arrive until later in the week. For now, we sat together on the rug I'd bought second-hand that afternoon, its pattern faded but clean. "Are we camping?" my daughter asked, eyes bright. I smiled. "Something like that." They laughed easily, too easily. Children were merciful that way. They trusted the moment they were in. After they fell asleep, bundled in blankets, coats hung over chairs to block drafts, I stood in the hallway, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the building. Pipes knocking. A neighbor's television murmuring through the wall. Footsteps above us, heavy and unself-conscious. The silence between those sounds felt larger than silence ever had before. I leaned my forehead against the wall and closed my eyes. This was the part no one warned you about. Not the paperwork, not the finances, not even the loneliness. It was the weight of being the only one now. The sole point of gravity. The knowledge that if you fell apart, there would be nothing underneath to catch the children. So you didn't fall. You learned how to hold yourself upright in pieces. Morning came pale and reluctant. The apartment was colder than I expected. The heater had run all night, but seemed to have lost the argument with winter sometime before dawn. I made coffee with a small machine I'd picked up used, listening to it sputter and strain like it, too, was adjusting to its new role. The kids ate cereal out of mismatched bowls, wrapped in sweaters. My daughter's feet didn't reach the floor when she sat on the chair. "It's chilly," she said. "I know," I replied. "We'll get a better blanket today." She nodded, satisfied. I watched them carefully that morning. The way they glanced at me more often than usual. The way their laughter came, then stopped, as if they were checking whether it was still allowed. I kept my voice steady, my movements unhurried. Strength, I was learning, was mostly about rhythm. After school, we walked home together, our breaths visible in the air. My son kicked at a frozen puddle, watching it crack. "It's smaller than the house," he said, not accusing, just observing. "Yes," I said. "Do we have to stay forever?" I stopped walking and knelt in front of him, meeting his eyes. "No," I said. "We stay as long as we need to." He considered this, then nodded. That night, after they were asleep again, my phone rang. Her name lit up the screen. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Hello?" I said. "So," she began, voice light, almost amused. "How's the new place?" "It's fine," I replied. A pause, then a small laugh. "I drove by earlier," she said. "Did you know the building used to be student housing?" I didn't respond. I can't believe you," she continued. "You really walked away with nothing. No fight, no plan." "I have a plan," I said quietly. "Oh," she replied. "Living paycheck to paycheck, playing hero in a shoebox?" Her words were sharp, but practiced, as if she'd been waiting to say them. "The kids deserve more than this," she said. "Stability, not whatever you're doing." "They're with me," I said. "They're safe." She scoffed. "For now." The line went quiet for a second, and I knew what was coming before she said it. "My lawyer thinks we should revisit custody," she said, "given your circumstances." I closed my eyes. "Threatening me won't help," I said. "I'm not threatening," she replied smoothly. "I'm being realistic. You always hated that." She hung up without saying goodbye. I stood in the kitchen long after the call ended, the phone heavy in my hand. This was the part I hadn't told the children. That staying calm was becoming harder. That the cold wasn't just in the walls. That the silence sometimes pressed so hard against my chest, I had to remind myself to breathe. But when morning came again, I made breakfast. I found their gloves. I walked them to school. I smiled. Because strength, I was learning, wasn't about never breaking. It was about choosing every single day to be whole where it mattered most. And in that small, cramped apartment, cold floors, thin walls, borrowed furniture, I made myself a promise. No matter how small this place felt, it would never feel empty. Not to them, never to them. There's a silence in memory that carries more weight than any present moment. It is a quiet that grows louder the longer you try to ignore it. Sitting in the small, cramped apartment, listening to the hum of the heater and the soft breathing of the children upstairs, I found myself drifting backward, 10 years into a life that felt like someone else's, yet had always been mine. I was not always a stay-at-home father, with nothing but my children's laughter and a modest apartment to mark my days. Once, I walked in towers of glass, moved through boardrooms that smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive leather, and carried the kind of ambition that made people notice, not for kindness, but for the cold certainty that I could accomplish anything I wanted. It started in my late 20s. I had no inheritance, no famous name, nothing but an idea and a relentless willingness to work while others slept. I remember the nights in a tiny office, windows open to the city skyline, the hum of neon outside, my phone ringing with deals I barely had time to understand. Each contract I signed, each merger I engineered, felt like assembling a machine that would grow bigger and faster than anything I could see in its entirety. I built it meticulously. My colleagues called me methodical, relentless, untouchable. They didn't know, not really, that my strategy was never just about the numbers. The empire I constructed, the series of startups, investments, and international partnerships, was a mirror. It reflected what I had believed I should become: powerful, visible, unshakable. I remember sitting in my corner office on the 40th floor, overlooking a city that never slept, and realizing one night that I was entirely alone. It was not loneliness born of absence. It was absence itself. The absence of something fundamental, something I hadn't thought to include in the equation. I had money, influence, a life that dazzled from the outside, but there was no warmth in it. No small hands tugging at me to show me the world as it felt, not as it was worth. No giggles echoing through a hallway. No one to witness the subtle triumphs of ordinary days. I met her shortly after that realization. She was everything I hadn't known I needed: warm, curious, alive. We laughed more in those early months than I had laughed in years. I introduced her to the skyline, the boardroom, the flights, the parties. She tolerated them politely, but she also reminded me of a different world. The ordinary world, rich with small gestures, quiet victories, simple presence. It was during those months and later years that I began to see the cost of empire. The late nights weren't just mine, they were empty spaces in the life I could have had with her. Birthdays I missed. Early morning breakfasts ignored. Stories left untold. Opportunities to hold and guide and nurture a human being. My own child, traded for power I now understood might never be fulfilling. And the first child came. I remember the hospital room, fluorescent lights above, the faint antiseptic smell, the new weight of responsibility. Holding my son for the first time, I understood the depths of what I had been missing. All the victories in boardrooms, all the acquisitions and contracts had nothing to do with this moment. Nothing compared to the fragile warmth of a life I had helped to create. That night, in the quiet after the nurses had left, I made a decision. One I would carry silently for years. I would step away. Not because I lacked ambition, but because ambition alone was not enough to justify a life lived in absence. I would trade the roar of the market for the quiet heartbeat of family. The transition was not easy. Leaving an empire behind is not like turning off a light switch. People questioned me. Partners whispered that I was making a grave mistake, that I was wasting a prime decade of influence. But I had seen the alternative: a man surrounded by wealth and accolades, empty-handed, when it came to what truly mattered. So I left, quietly, meticulously, without fanfare. I sold the companies I could, disengaged from the deals that would have pulled me back in, and moved into a modest home far from the glare of public attention. Friends and colleagues were shocked. Many never understood why I made the choice. I told them, when asked, that it was about priorities, about choosing substance over appearance, but most people heard only the word quit. And yet, in choosing this life, I found freedom I had never known. There were no red carpets, no expectations of brilliance at every turn. There were mornings waking up to the smell of breakfast, evenings spent reading bedtime stories, afternoons guiding small hands as they learned to walk and run and question the world. A wealth of experience that no balance sheet could measure. I built a different kind of empire then, the one that mattered, one of presence, of consistency, of attention. And it was exhausting in ways money could never explain. There was no team of assistants to handle the logistics of school, of meals, of scraped knees. No secretary to draft letters or pay bills. The weight of responsibility fell entirely on me. And yet, paradoxically, it was lighter than any deal I had ever signed in my life. I remember sitting in that first apartment, the one that smelled faintly of paint and dust, the same way I would sit 10 years later after the divorce, and thinking about how strange it was that I had been preparing for this all my life. The skills I had honed in business, patience, strategy, timing, negotiation, were now tools for love, for care, for quiet endurance. They had been repurposed for a higher purpose, one no shareholder could ever understand. Money, I realized, had always been a tool, never a measure of worth. And in walking away from it, I was not losing power. I was reclaiming something far more essential, the ability to shape a life where presence and responsibility mattered more than prestige and profit. I remember one particular memory vividly. A morning in the kitchen, my daughter perched on the counter, laughing as I tried to make pancakes while also reminding my son to brush his teeth. Flour dusted the air. The smell of butter and sugar filled the room. My phone rang constantly with business inquiries I had long since ignored. And yet, none of it mattered. Not the calls, not the contracts, not the titles. It was then that I understood the philosophy I would carry quietly for the rest of my life. Wealth is temporary. Power is fleeting. Influence fades. But the mark you leave on the hearts of those you love, the guidance, the patience, the quiet insistence on presence is permanent. That is the only kind of empire worth building. Even as I embraced this life, I knew the world outside would never fully understand it. People would whisper about ambition squandered, potential wasted. They would mistake humility for weakness, restraint for indifference. And that was acceptable, because the measure of life I had learned is not in the applause of strangers. It is in the eyes of the children who see you, who trust you, who rely on you not to falter. There were moments of doubt, of course. Nights when I would lie awake and wonder if I had truly abandoned something I could never reclaim. Nights when the voice of my ex-wife, or a friend or a colleague, would echo in my mind. You could have had it all. You could have been someone they would remember in headlines, not bedtime stories. But then I would remember the mornings, the first laugh after a scraped knee heals. the pride in a homework assignment done well, the quiet moment when a child drifts off to sleep and clings to your finger just long enough to remind you that your life is theirs and theirs is yours. That was my empire, invisible to most, impervious to critique, enduring beyond the lifetimes of boardrooms and stock markets. A kingdom built not of gold, but of presence, a wealth measured not in accounts, but in love. And so, when I now sat in a small apartment after leaving my marriage, listening to the muffled sounds of my children sleeping, I understood something essential. This life, the one I had carefully chosen years ago, and the one I now had to rebuild in the wake of another loss, was the one that had always mattered. I smiled faintly, thinking of my younger self, running between offices, counting contracts instead of heartbeats. I would never regret the empire I had built because it taught me the lesson that no school or boardroom could. The only true wealth is the ability to be fully present where it counts most. And presence, I realized, was not free. It required sacrifice, endurance, and courage. It required walking away from what others consider success and walking toward what they might call insignificance. Only insignificance in their eyes is often the most profound significance there is. I closed my eyes, letting the memories wash over me. The long nights of negotiation, the thrill of creation, the quiet epiphany in the hospital room with my newborn. All of it had led me here, to scraped floors, cold walls, and the steady, unwavering trust of two children who had no idea what they had inherited. Not money, not prestige, not titles, but something far greater. A father who was present, and for that I was willing to endure anything. The rain outside the apartment continued tapping against the glass. The lights of the city blurred through the mist, and for the first time in a long while, I felt entirely, undeniably at home in the life I had chosen, even if the world outside would never understand why. Because the truth, the one lesson worth all the wealth and power I had ever known, was simple. Empires crumble, children do not. And a life built on presence, patience, and quiet devotion is a life that lasts far longer than any fortune ever could. The first morning at work was quieter than I expected and louder than I feared. The apartment still smelled faintly of damp walls and old paint, the heater barely keeping the corners of the rooms above freezing. I had dressed in a simple shirt, dark trousers, and a jacket that had seen better winters. It was not the uniform of a boardroom titan, but it would have to do. The small paycheck I was about to earn could cover rent and groceries, and that was all I needed. The walk to the bus stop felt longer than it had any right to be. The sidewalks were slick with early frost, and my breath came out in soft clouds. Children waved from schoolyards in the distance, their laughter carried faintly by the wind. I watched them for a moment, letting it remind me why I was doing this, why I had made the decisions that now placed me here. I had taken a job at a local supply company, nothing glamorous, nothing strategic, just honest labor. It was a place that needed bodies, hands that could lift, and someone who would arrive without excuses. That someone was me. And I knew that to most people it was a step down in every measurable way. By 9 o'clock, I was standing behind the counter arranging small orders for local businesses. The register clicked under my fingers. The smell of coffee from the break room mingled with the faint aroma of cardboard and polish. It was ordinary, and yet, for the first time in years, I felt the pulse of a world I could touch directly. A world where effort yielded results in a tangible, immediate way. That first customer arrived with a smile and a clip-on badge from a neighboring office. "Oh, hi," she said brightly. "I didn't know you were working here now." "I am," I said. Her eyes flicked past me, lingering on my hands for a moment, as if trying to remember where she had seen them before. Recognition slowly came, her smile tightening. "Oh," she said softly. "I see." She didn't say more, didn't ask more. And that was all it took for me to feel it, the quiet judgment, the subtle ripple that passed through the community of parents and colleagues who had once admired her life and, by extension, her choices. I had learned long ago that the world often confuses visibility with value. The louder someone appears, the more they seem to matter. And yet, here I was, invisible, and for reasons no one outside my home would understand, unshakable. The morning passed in small, measured tasks, organizing stock, filing invoices, making sure deliveries left on time. Every motion felt like a meditation, a rhythm that grounded me in the certainty that I could, in fact, sustain this life. I had not built an empire for money alone. I had built it to prove to myself that I could handle responsibility. And now, that responsibility was no less demanding, even if it carried fewer zeros. The humiliation came later, though I had expected it. I saw them first at the corner store. Two women I had once shared coffee and polite conversation with, while their husbands were in meetings with my wife's acquaintances. They glanced up at me as I stepped inside, then back at their phones, whispering just low enough that I could hear. "Can you believe he's here?" one said, a mixture of disbelief and amusement. "I heard she left him with nothing, nothing at all. And now, look at him." They laughed softly, not cruelly but pointedly, as if they were pointing out a flaw in the universe itself. I paid no attention. I kept my hands on the counter, continued with the task at hand, and let the silence between us speak volumes they could not understand. Because the truth is, humiliation is only powerful if you allow it to penetrate. And I had learned over 10 years of walking in boardrooms and living among strangers who measured worth in spreadsheets and applause, that nothing external can define you if you know the value of what you carry inside. By mid-afternoon, I was returning from a delivery when my daughter called from the apartment. "Daddy," she said, voice bright even through the crackle of the phone. "Guess what?" "What?" I asked, adjusting the strap of the satchel over my shoulder. "I drew a picture for you." I could hear the rustle of paper, the soft hum of concentration that always accompanied her efforts. She described the colors, the little stick figures, the sun with a crooked smile. And I listened. I marveled. There was no place on earth I wanted to be more than in that moment. Not in towers of glass, not in conference rooms filled with nodding faces, not even in luxury cars or private flights. Here, with the voice of my daughter describing a picture she made for me, I was richer than I had ever been. Even the small victories at work began to feel like blessings. I found a stack of incorrectly labeled orders and corrected them before my manager noticed. I helped a coworker lift a heavy package and received a simple nod of thanks. No praise, no headlines, just acknowledgement that comes from doing a job well. And that, in itself, was enough. The evenings, though, were the hardest. After walking the children home through the misting rain, helping them shed layers and hang coats that still smelled faintly of frost, I cooked dinner. Not the elaborate meals I once imagined for a family with money, but honest food, soup, bread, eggs, the kind of meals that fill a stomach and nourish a soul, if only because they are prepared with patience and presence. Sometimes I would sit with them at the table and just watch. My son would talk about the day. My daughter would show me a new drawing or a story she had written in her small notebook. And in those moments, I felt the quiet power of fatherhood, the kind of strength that cannot be measured in titles or income statements, but only in the trust and affection of small humans who rely on you. I thought about my ex-wife, though I rarely spoke her name aloud. She had always measured success externally, in visible achievements and social perception. And yes, she had been right about some things. I was not ambitious in the ways she had expected, but I had ambition of a different sort. The ambition to be steadfast, to endure, to be enough when it mattered. And in the quiet evenings, as the children fell asleep and the apartment settled into its own rhythm of pipes and distant traffic, I reflected on the lessons I had learned. The world may mock you for living modestly, for choosing presence over prestige, but no judgment can strip you of what you build inside. There were days when the stares of strangers and the whispers of parents stung more than I like to admit. When I carried boxes into the apartment, stacking them in corners while children trailed behind, I sometimes wondered whether I had truly made the right choice. But then I would see my daughter's wide eyes when she discovered the new rug I had managed to afford, or hear my son's quiet "thank you" after I helped him finish a difficult homework problem. And I would remember that these small moments were far more lasting than anything the world could ever measure. On one particularly gray afternoon, I stopped by the small park near the apartment. The children ran ahead, shouting, kicking leaves into the wind. I stood under a bare tree, watching, feeling the cold bite through my coat, and realized that this life, so modest, so ordinary, was exactly what I had chosen. Not out of weakness, not out of defeat, but because it offered the only kind of fulfillment I had ever truly understood. Strength, I had learned, was quiet. It did not need applause. It did not require recognition. It was measured in presence, in patience, in the capacity to endure without bitterness. It was measured in showing up every day, in being there when no one was watching, in holding the line when life tested you in small, imperceptible ways. And yet, even in quiet strength, there were trials. There were moments of humiliation, of doubt, of whispered judgments that reached even into this small apartment. People who had once nodded respectfully to my wife now looked at me as though I were a cautionary tale. A man who had failed to keep up with a world that valued noise over substance. But I did not fight them. I did not argue. I merely continued. Folded laundry, packed lunches, answered the phone with a steady voice, cooked dinner, listened, comforted, guided, loved. It was exhausting, yes, more than any merger or acquisition had ever demanded. But it was honest, and there's a rare kind of power in honesty, a power that cannot be taken, cannot be replicated, cannot be diminished by the sneers of strangers or the judgments of those who measure life only in what they can see. I thought often of the empire I'd left behind, not with regret, but with clarity. The money, the influence, the accolades. They had taught me one essential truth. The most important work is invisible. It happens in quiet kitchens, on cold sidewalks, in the rooms where children laugh and cry and grow. It happens when you are the only steady presence in a small life that relies on you completely. And so each evening, after the apartment had quieted and the children were asleep, I would sit at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling in my hands, the rain tapping against the window, the faint sound of the city in the distance. I would close my eyes and remind myself that everything outside this apartment, the whispers, the judgment, the world's version of success, was immaterial. What mattered was what happened inside these walls, the care, the guidance, the consistency. That was where true power lived. That was where true wealth could be measured. And in that, I found a calm that no fortune could have purchased. Because being a father is not a performance. It is endurance, it is presence, it is unwavering attention to what truly matters. And in this modest apartment, with 2 children asleep and dreaming of a world shaped by love and not appearance, I understood the quiet truth of my life. I was not failing. I was building something no one outside these walls could ever see, but everything inside them could feel. And that, in its own way, was more powerful than any empire I had ever known. The letter arrived on a gray Thursday morning, its envelope thick and formal, stamped with the insignia of a law firm that had never written to me before. I held it in my hands at the kitchen table, my coffee forgotten and cooling beside me, the children's laughter outside muffled through the thin apartment walls. I could feel the cold seeping through the paper, the words inside heavier than the envelope suggested. My daughter was drawing at the table, humming softly, and my son was nearby, tracing the pattern of the wood grain on the table's surface with quiet concentration. I read the letter slowly, deliberately, letting each line sink in before moving to the next. It was precise, clinical, and merciless. They claimed I was unfit. They claimed my small, humble apartment, my modest job, my quiet life were insufficient to raise children properly. They cited my lack of income, my departure from society's expectations, my unwillingness or inability to provide stability and opportunity for the children. And most insidiously, they suggested that custody should be reconsidered, that my ex-wife, with her resources, her visibility, her lifestyle, would be a more appropriate guardian. I did not speak aloud. The words echoed in my mind, slow and methodical. And for a moment, I allowed myself to feel the heat rising, the flicker of a long-buried, simmering anger. It was not the wild anger of shouting, of violence, or of immediate reaction. It was colder, more precise. a clarity that sharpened each thought into a weapon of intent.